spinal meninges. And as we do, we'll answer a couple questions. What is the role of the spinal meninges, and what are the layers of the meninges? We learned that the central nervous system is composed of the brain and spinal cord, and I'll say those two structures have got to be in the Sports Center top 10 for some of our most important structures as human beings. And because the central nervous system is so critical to our function, we make sure to protect it. One layer of protection is found in the skeletal system. The skull and vertebral column encompass nearly the entire central nervous system, and as great as that skeletal protection is, it's still not enough. We need an additional layer that protects the CNS from rattling around inside that bony protection and being injured. That's where the meningeal layers and the cerebrospinal fluid come in and save the day. The cerebrospinal fluid acts as a shock absorber and helps to prevent the brain and the spinal cord from making contact with the surrounding bone. However, it's not perfect, and if there is an excessive blow to the head, then the brain will make contact with the skull like you see with concussions. The CSF also allows for buoyancy of the brain because the brain is heavy, and if it wasn't floating in cerebrospinal fluid, its weight would cut off its own blood supply. Finally, we need some type of layered structure to enclose that CSF and make sure it surrounds the central nervous system, and the meningeal layers step up and play that role perfectly. So let's take a closer look at how all those structures come together. We're going to focus on the spinal meninges today, so we have a transverse cross-section of the cervical spinal cord. And how do we know that we're in the cervical region? I'll let you guys pause the video and figure that out. We'll also zoom in a little bit so we can see the meningeal layers better. So the outermost meningeal layer highlighted in blue is the spinal dura mater. You will also hear it referred to as the tough mother because dura means tough and mater means mother, and I'll tell you that is a well-deserved nickname. It's primarily composed of fibrous tissue with some elastic tissue, and you'll be able to feel in lab just how tough it really is. Just deep to the spinal dura mater is the spinal arachnoid mater, highlighted there in green. The word arachnoid refers to spider or cobweb-like, and the name may not be as intimidating as the big, strong dura mater, but it's accurate because of the web-like projections from the arachnoid mater called arachnoid trabeculae. Then the deepest layer is the pia mater, highlighted there in pink. The pia mater is in direct contact with the spinal cord and intimately follows all of its grooves and contours, and we can see that in both of our images here. With the three layers highlighted, we can now see there's some space between the arachnoid mater and the pia mater. So what fills that space? The term sub is Latin for under or below, so it only makes sense that we call this area the subarachnoid space, and this subarachnoid space is filled with the cerebrospinal fluid that we discussed earlier. Now, the last line of protection we need for the spinal cord is to make sure that it is suspended in the CSF and not just floating freely. There are two pia mater structures that keep the spinal cord anchored and suspended. The first we'll look at are the denticulate ligaments. The denticulate ligaments are these little tooth-like projections that anchor the spinal cord in the center of the vertebral canal. We can remember these tooth-like structures because the dent in denticulate is just like the dent in dentist, and it just refers to tooth. The denticulate ligaments will also be your friend in lab because they separate the dorsal nerve roots from the ventral nerve roots within the vertebral canal. And there's another view of them there. The other pia mater structure is the phylum terminale. It's not visible here, so we're going to go throwback mode and use this cool illustration from the 1918 Gray's Anatomy. To get ourselves oriented, we'll label all the structures we can see. In blue, there is the dura mater. Then in orange, we have the spinal cord. And in yellow, we have the cauda equina. Then the tapering of the spinal cord in purple is the conus medullaris. And if we follow the conus medullaris to its point, we can see this filament of pia mater that's highlighted in purple. That's the phylum terminale, and it attaches the conus medullaris to the axial skeleton and helps keep the spinal cord suspended. And those are the spinal meninges, so let's do a quick recap. We learned there are three meningeal layers, the dura mater, arachnoid mater, and pia mater. The cerebrospinal fluid is found in the subarachnoid space, and the pia mater structures of the phylum terminale and the denticulate ligaments anchor the spinal cord and keep it centered in the vertebral canal. And that is it for our recap of the spinal meninges.